So one side wants to talk, the other doesn't. A bit like frenemies, I guess. That's also what Western media is calling the new fault line in West Asia. Saudi Arabia versus the United Arab Emirates. Not just a battle of countries, it's also a battle of personalities. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nayhan. Both are better known by acronyms MBS and MBZ. So what are they fighting about? Leadership of the Arab world and the Gulf. Now don't think of this as a conflict, it's more of a rivalry, and a personal one at that. Both these rulers have an interesting past. MBS is all of 37 years old, MBZ, the Emirati, 62 years old. They started off as mentor and protege. MBZ groomed the younger Saudi ruler. He lobbied for him in Washington. But now the dynamic is changing. Let me tell you what happened in December last year. MBS gathered some journalists in Riyadh. It was supposed to be an off-the-record briefing. But his statements have now leaked. And what did MBS say? He accused the UAE of backstabbing Riyadh. He also threatened to blockade them. His exact words were these: "It will be worse than what I did with Qatar." Now this is big. It's like Joe Biden accusing Justin Trudeau of betraying him, or Rishi Sunak threatening to blockade the US. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are long-time allies. They share historical and religious ties. So why the fallout? Reports say MBS and MBZ have not spoken to each other in 6 months. We have a war going on. Oil prices are so volatile. Iran is capturing tankers. So you would assume the two leaders will be in contact. But why aren't they? Because differences are rising, and 3 of them stand out. One is financial interests. The UAE has long been the commercial hub of West Asia. It's more liberal than Saudi Arabia, so all the Western companies were based in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. MBS wants to change that. He wants these companies to shift to Riyadh, to Saudi Arabia. How does he plan to do that? By boosting Saudi Arabia's soft power. He bought multiple football clubs in the West. He also brought Western superstars to play in domestic leagues. It's all part of the appeal. And for MBS, this is do or die. The world is gradually shifting away from oil. Technology is the next big thing. And on that, the UAE has a head start. If Riyadh does not catch up, it could lose its regional leadership. So that's one point of contention. The second big difference is on oil. Saudi Arabia has aligned itself with Russia. Together, they have cut oil output to keep prices up. Reports say the UAE does not agree with this. They gave in only after intense pressure from the Saudis. But that may not happen every time. You see, until now, only Saudi Arabia had the power to dictate oil prices. Their output alone could change prices. But now the UAE has reached similar levels. So they too can dictate prices by varying output. The third difference is on foreign policy. Both sides have different interests in Yemen. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are fighting Iran-backed rebels in Yemen. But for MBS, it's a war that he started. For MBZ, the stakes are much less. Last year, he signed a deal with the Yemeni leadership. It permits the UAE to intervene in Yemen and its waters. Naturally, the Saudi leader MBS did not like it. He felt like he'd been one-upped. So he responded with diplomatic moves of his own. First, he normalized relations with Iran, and then he welcomed Syria back into the Arab League. And our reports say he's keen on recognizing Israel too. It's a game of geopolitical chess, really. The question is, how does it end? MBS has reportedly sent a list of demands to the UAE. But will MBZ accept? He's apparently warned the Saudi leader about his rogue actions. He thinks MBS is taking way too many risks, like getting closer to Russia or striking a deal with Iran. It's hard to say how this rivalry will unfold in the next decades. The Saudi leader is still in his 30s. He will be ruler much longer than MBZ. Plus, Riyadh is the custodian of Islam's holiest sites. That position is unshakable. The chances of this rivalry becoming violent are remote, but you can't rule out outside interference. Just think about it. 2 regional powers locked in a Cold War of sorts. It's the perfect chance for powers like China to meddle, to maybe take sides and make it worse. Either way, this is a rivalry the whole world will watch out for, including folks here in India. We have excellent ties with both these leaders, MBS and MBZ. A united Saudi-UAE alliance is in India and the world's interest. As long as they have a working relationship, the world should not mind. It's best if the rivalry is limited to Manchester City versus Newcastle United. Beyond that, it can be worrying. After all, it's not like either of them will be voted out. So MBS and MBZ may not be the best of friends anymore, but the Saudi Crown Prince has no dearth of options. In fact, he has just revived an old friendship. I'm talking about Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. MBS and Erdogan used to be bitter enemies. Erdogan once accused MBS of using Saudi agents to murder journalist Jamal Khashoggi. So you can imagine what this relationship looked like. But now the two leaders are all hugs and smiles. Erdogan was recently in Jeddah. He gifted the Crown Prince new cars. MBS then drove the Turkish president around. It looked too good to be true and quite a U-turn for Erdogan. But then again, when your economy is in a shambles, you will try every trick in the book to woo a potential investor. And that's exactly what Erdogan is doing, wooing the Gulf states. And what is he getting in return? Defense and energy deals. Saudi Arabia and Turkey signed a lot of agreements. The biggest one was this, a drone deal between Turkish defense firm Baykar and the Saudi Defense Ministry. Now some context here. Baykar is one of Turkey's most popular arms makers. They're known for this drone, the Bayraktar TB2 combat drone. This drone is being used in conflicts all across the world, in Azerbaijan, in Libya, even in Ukraine. And Baykar has export agreements with 30 countries. All of them want the Bayraktar drone, so you can imagine how popular it is. But the deal with Saudi Arabia is not for the Bayraktar drone. The Saudis want an even more advanced machine, a drone called Akinci. In Turkish, it means raider. Now, the Akinci is a high-altitude, long-endurance, unmanned aerial vehicle. Simply put, it's a military-grade attack drone. Compared to the Bayraktar, it is more advanced. In fact, it is the most sophisticated drone built by Turkey till date. So obviously, it has generated a lot of interest. 6 countries have already lined up to buy it. Saudi Arabia is the 7th one. The details of the deal have not been made public, but Baykar calls it, quote-unquote, the biggest defense and aviation export in the history of Turkey. So we don't know how many drones Riyadh is buying, but it has to be a big number for the company to call it the biggest deal ever. These drones will be deployed in the air and naval forces of Saudi Arabia, which brings us to the question, why does Saudi Arabia need so many attack drones? And not just drones. The Saudis are spending big on defense overall. They're ramping up military acquisitions. A new report shows that Riyadh is the 5th largest military spender in the world now. It ranks higher than the UK, Germany, and France. In 2022, Saudi Arabia spent $75 billion on its military. That's a 16% increase from the year before. In fact, Riyadh spends around 7.4% of its GDP on defense, 7.4%. That's more than any country except Ukraine, and Ukraine is currently at war. But what explains Saudi Arabia's trajectory? This, by the way, is in line with the regional trend. West Asian nations spend almost 4% of their GDP on military spending. The global average is 2.2%, so they are almost double the average. Where is this money going? Drones are a big draw, obviously. So are fighter jets. In fact, West Asia has always been a major buyer of advanced fighter jets. There are 4 major deals now. And these deals could reshape the region. The countries involved here are Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Egypt. Turkey is eyeing the F-16 deal with the US. They've been waiting for a long time for this. If it comes through, this would be their biggest arms deal with America in almost a decade. Meanwhile, Iran is planning to buy the Su-35 flanker jets from Russia. They could arrive in Tehran later this year, and this is also a very significant deal, their biggest in 30 years. Iran has not imported 4th-generation fighters since buying the Soviet MiG-29s in 1990. Then you have Iraq. It is apparently negotiating for 14 Rafale jets. And finally, Egypt, which is eyeing the F-15s from America. The talks have been on for a while. The deal could happen very soon, we are told. So West Asian nations are buying drones and fighters. What for? Are they preparing for new wars? Or are they investing in deterrence capabilities? The regional dynamics are shifting. Also, oil revenues have gone up recently, and some of that money is being diverted for defense purchases. So they're arming up. And there's nothing to suggest that this trend will change in the coming years. In Israel, the protests have intensified again. Thousands of people have taken to the streets. They're demonstrating against the judicial overhaul plan, a controversial plan being pushed by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Critics say this will reduce the power of the Supreme Court of Israel. So they're protesting. And this has been on for 7 months now. The world has taken note. Even staunch allies like the US have advised Israel's government to engage with the critics. It came as a strong and rather public rebuke. So what does it mean for the ironclad relationship between America and Israel? Well, as we speak, the Israeli president is in the US and Prime Minister Netanyahu has got an invite to meet President Biden soon. Here's a report.
The more you press, the harder we resist. We are saying no to dictatorship, and it will not pass.
Make sure that our voices are heard.
Everything is in danger if we are going to be a dictator.
It will not pass. Israeli protesters are doing everything they can to stop the controversial judicial overhaul plan from passing. Since the beginning of the year, they have been demonstrating, taking to the streets in thousands to make their voices heard, because the Israelis fear that the overhaul will upend their way of life. So what is the overhaul? Its proponents say that it's a law to bring balance to Israel, to curb excessive judicial overreach, a way for parliament to be supreme. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insists that all the resistance is misplaced.
The claim that Israel's entire democracy will collapse because of the amendment of the reasonability standard is a statement that is disconnected from reality and is meant in its entirety to scare the public for nothing.
Of course, that's not how critics see it. The overhaul will prevent Israel's Supreme Court from striking down laws it sees as unconstitutional. It'll give politicians a greater say in judicial appointments, even allow the ruling party to handpick judges or fire top officials like Israel's Attorney General. To critics, the overhaul would see Israel slide towards autocracy, and that's why they are out on the streets, why they keep declaring days of disruption.
We're fighting here for our rights, and we're fighting that other people can receive rights, and not just us. We're fighting for a better country. We're fighting for justice.
The demonstrators have been met with fierce resistance. Arrests have become regular. Yesterday, the police even deployed water cannons. It seems obvious that Netanyahu and his allies are not going to budge, but that hasn't deterred the protesters.
We're trying to make sure that our voices are heard and trying to make some sense into this and see if the coalition will finally listen to us, and if not, maybe the world will, and stop this.
It's a hopeful appeal, and the world has taken notice of the protests. But it seems Israel's biggest ally, the US, has decided to turn a blind eye. As the protests raged on in the streets of Israel yesterday, the country's president, Isaac Herzog, was in a meeting with US President Joe Biden. Herzog acknowledged the turmoil in Israel, but his opinion seemed contrary to the protesters' perceptions about Israel's democracy.
My heart and soul is also in Israel, in the heated debate which we are going through as a society. It's a heated debate, but it's also a virtue and a tribute to the greatness of Israeli democracy. And let me reiterate clear, crystal clear, Israeli democracy is sound, strong, and resilient.
It seems like he was papering over the cracks, trying to brush Israel's problems under the carpet. Surely the US would have seen through this, right? Surely Washington would have taken up its favorite role and lectured Israel. Of course not. This is what actually happened.
America's commitment to Israel is firm, and it is ironclad. I think as you saw from my readout of the call with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and you'll see this tomorrow when the President gets a chance to meet with President Herzog, our commitment to Israel is ironclad. And we're going to make that clear and consistent every chance we get.
Ironclad, or business as usual, overhaul or no. Kirby also spoke about a call between Biden and Netanyahu.
The call fell today. That doesn't mean that, and you shouldn't take away from the fact that they had a conversation today and that they'll meet again in the fall, that we have less concerns over these judicial reforms or less concerns over some of the extremist activities and behavior by some members of the Netanyahu cabinet. Those concerns are still valid. They're disturbing.
So despite Washington's disapproval of the judicial overhaul, Biden will meet Netanyahu this autumn. Despite the US discomfort with Netanyahu's political allies, the ties will not waver. Remember, Israel currently has its most right-wing government ever. Some of its ministers have received widespread criticism for their antics. But at the end of the day, it's obvious. After all is said and done, it isn't likely that the US-Israel partnership will change. It will likely remain ironclad no matter what.
Our next story is about a language, a primitive one, the first language born of the digital world. I'm talking about emojis, those little pictorial icons on our phones. They punctuate our texts, memes and posts, like smiley faces or praying hands or a high five. I'm sure you've used these. 92% millennials used emojis in daily conversations. And just in the past 3 years, emojis have seen a 775% rise in use. They're everywhere, in every conversation. Love is expressed with a heart icon. Mean jokes are masked by laughing emojis. And in some cases, people are taken to court over a thumbs up. That's what happened in Canada. A farmer had to pay the price of an emoji, and a heavy one at that, more than $61,000. Here's the story. The farmer spoke to a buyer about a deal for the purchase of flax. Then the buyer sent him a contract via text message. He asked the farmer for confirmation. The farmer responded with a thumbs up emoji, but he did not make the delivery. So the buyer took him to court and he was found guilty. Classic emoji miscommunication. The buyer assumed that the thumbs up meant confirmation, but the farmer was only confirming that he'd received the message. He was not giving a go-ahead for the contract. But as they say, justice is blind, even to emojis, it seems. So now the farmer has to pay a fine of over $61,000. It sounds a bit odd, and the court agrees. They've called it a quote-unquote non-traditional means to sign a document. But they also said that the thumbs up emoji, by its very definition, is used to describe agreement. And in this case, it can be interpreted as a digital signature. The judge called this, and I'm quoting again, he called this the new reality in Canadian society. But let's face it, this reality is hardly limited to Canada. More emojis are showing up in court cases throughout the world, mostly in sexual harassment and criminal cases. In 2016, a French court convicted a man of threatening his ex-girlfriend. Do you know what he'd done? Sent her a gun emoji. He was sentenced to 6 months in prison and slapped a $1,200 fine. In 2017, New Zealand saw a case of stalking. A man was sentenced to jail for 8 months, again because of an emoji. In 2018, 46 people were slapped with criminal cases in India for replying to a woman's official message with an emoji. The case was later quashed by the Madras High Court. In the US too, cases featuring emojis are on the rise, and in England, the icons frequently appear in criminal, family and employment hearings. So the trend is quite clear across the board. It's also up for debate. Attorneys have to stand in court and argue the different interpretations of tiny guns and eggplants. Can a knife emoji mean a threat to kill someone? Does a heart emoji from a manager constitute sexual harassment? We ask because emojis express a wide range of emotions, and they're quite flexible. And that's usually a good thing because they let us be colorfully creative. But that also leaves room for misinterpretation. For instance, a thumbs up emoji. It generally means agreement, but some young people now use it sarcastically too. Others merely use it to acknowledge the receipt of something. While in some West Asian countries, this gesture is offensive. So many meanings for one simple emoji. And remember, there are over 3,000 emojis today. So just imagine the confusion. Also, different devices display the same emojis differently. I'll give you an example. On Google phones, a grinning face has smiling eyes. It's a happy emoji. But on Apple phones, it has a grimace, almost as if it's ready to fight. Now, according to a study, 25% of emoji users are unaware of this difference. In the context of law, though, this is a big problem. Simple confusion can be unforgiving, and the legal world has begun to accept it. For instance, last year, many lawyers in Britain urged the judiciary, they demanded guidance on the interpretation of emojis. Now, this may seem like the equivalent of sitting with the elderly and telling them that the peach emoji does not mean what they think it does. It will be an awkward conversation for sure, but it's an important conversation to have, because emojis now appear in virtually every area of the law, and the courts must keep up. As for the users, throwing emojis around like confetti may not be the best idea. The next time you look at one of those icons, think before you press. Have you heard of passport indices? They're a way to rank the strength of your passport. One of the most popular rankings is the Henley Passport Index. Their latest list is out, and it says Singapore has the world's strongest passport. It's usually either Singapore or Japan. They've been swapping the top spot for the last 5 years, even tying for the first place in 2019. But what makes their passport so powerful? How are these ranks calculated? What does it really say about your country? Which are the worst performers? And where does India stand? Here's a report.
It's that time of year again. The latest Henley Passport Index is out, and this time Singapore has clinched the top spot. It's not all that surprising. The island nation has an enviable record when it comes to the Henley Passport Index. In the last 6 years, it usually ranked first or second. It has been continuously vying for the top spot with another Asian powerhouse, Japan. The land of the rising sun is also a land of effortless international travel. The passport rankings prove this, because Henley ranks passports in a simple way. For every country that lets you enter without a visa, your passport gets a point. This applies to completely visa-free travel, visas on arrival, visitors permits, or an electronic travel authority or ETA when entering the destination. The easier it is for you to enter a country without applying for a visa first, the higher your passport is ranked. It's that simple. Henley calculates the points out of 227. That's for 227 different travel destinations. It's more than the countries on Earth because of special requirements or travel to disputed territories. Henley calculates the rank of 199 passports. So this year, Singapore's passport lords over 198 others. And how many places can you enter visa-free with a Singaporean passport? 192. Yes, with Singapore's shiny red passport, you can just hop on a plane and 192 countries will let you arrive on their shores without a visa. Last year, it was 193 countries for a Japanese passport, but that number has fallen by 4 this year to 189. So the Japanese passport languishes at 3rd place, below Germany, Italy and Spain, who are all tied for the 2nd place at 190 visa-free destinations. Japan is tied with the likes of Austria, Finland, France, Luxembourg, South Korea and Sweden. Of course, that's not bad company at all. Compare that to the bottom of the rankings. Dead last this year, like every other year in the last decade barring 2018, is Afghanistan. 2018 was a rare blip. That year, it was Iraq that ranked last. It usually beats Afghanistan at least, but it's always at the bottom of the rankings as well, as are Syria, Somalia, Yemen and Pakistan. These are the countries with the weakest passports around. And you'll notice a pattern. Rich Asian and European countries at the top, poor, war-torn, economically handicapped countries at the bottom. Which makes sense. How can a government negotiate better travel terms when it's busy with a war or famine? But there's also another correlation. Which country is more likely to produce illegal immigrants? And which country is likely to have citizens that don't want to leave? It's hard to measure a country's attractiveness, but per capita income is a decent indicator. And all your top passport countries have high per capita incomes. They're also usually democracies. These points could explain the absence of China. It's not a democracy, and while it is rich in terms of GDP, in per capita terms, it holds a middling rank. And what about the US, the world's richest nation, the so-called oldest democracy? Well, it's 8th in the passport rankings, down from 7th place last year. Americans can now enter 184 countries without a passport, down from 186 from a year ago. What explains this? Well, another aspect of visa-free access is cordial diplomacy. You know, being seen as a friendly nation. We'll leave it up to you to decide how friendly the US seems. What about India, the rising global power? Well, there's good news and bad news. The good news is that the Indian passport is now ranked 80th, up 7 spots from last year's ranking. The bad news? Indian passport holders can enter only 57 countries without a visa, down from 60 last year. Yes, India's rank went up, even though visa-free travel destinations went down. Basically, some other nations lost even more access than India, and the Indian passport benefited as a result. Of course, the passport rankings can only tell you so much. They don't accurately depict global realities. After all, financially crippled Latin American nations like Argentina and Venezuela still rank relatively high. So, passport indices aren't some all-knowing markers of a country's progress. But they are essential information for one thing: deciding which passport to get if you had a choice or want to apply for dual citizenship.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with Turkey. Multiple wildfires are burning across the country. Military planes, emergency helicopters and hundreds of firefighters have been deployed to deal with the situation. Meanwhile, here's an example of how not to treat animals. An Iranian man was recently filmed riding a whale shark and then dancing on top of it. This incident happened in the Persian Gulf. And in the United Kingdom, a group of skydivers has set a new record. They created the largest ever formation while free falling through the air. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1969, the Indian government nationalized 14 major commercial banks. This step was taken when Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister of India. These banks controlled about 85% of bank deposits in the country. The economics behind the move remains debatable to this day. We're leaving you with that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Hi, bonjour. Oh,